We move on to the next one, which was a highly anticipated movie because it was based off of a book that just blew
Mm-hmm.
up on TikTok several years after the movie or the book was already out. It got optioned before it blew up, and it turns out that the director of the movie is also the star of the movie. That blew me away because I saw this entire thing not knowing that. And
Really?
it changed a little bit afterwards because then I
Yeah.
hear a lot of backstory that I want to make sure we save for the end about
Okay,
controversy
cool.
dealing behind the scenes. But just approaching it from this guy had also done 5 Feet Apart. And I heard him say
Right.
that 5 Feet Apart was a movie turned into a book. And then got done that way. Whereas the other one is a book turned into a movie adaptation. So he seems like a smart guy. He knows how to sell something with a book being
Mm-hmm.
attached to it. He gets the IP game. He's been out there for a while. I even saw his man's TED Talk because he's been doing so many roles as these machismo characters. He did like a thing on masculinity. I'm like, okay, I see why
Yeah.
you were chosen. I see why you were attracted to this story.
Yeah, I remember him from Jane the Virgin. He was kind of like
Raphael?
the handsome option for Jane in season 1.
Yeah, they knew exactly what they were doing with his casting. And look,
Mm-hmm.
I think he fits the part. We're going through the book right now. It is a doozy, but overall, the premise of this movie is that you follow this woman named Lily, who obviously had a bad upbringing with her mother.
Excuse me, it's Lily
Lily
Blossom
Bloom,
Bloom
Bloom
who owns a flower store. Just want to put that out there.
called Lily Blooms. After this terrible upbringing, you see the present time after her father's death, where she's trying to like reconcile and try to become her own. As she has this shop, and she comes across this guy right here, who's the director and the main guy, who's played who's called Ryle. In between it all, there's flashbacks to her ex, her first love, this homeless
Mm-hmm.
boy who came into town right before her dad, who wants to be the mayor, and builds a relationship with him in secret. And you kind of have both stories going on in conjunction. One is a guy who understands her trauma because he also faced trauma at home, and then this other dude is the richest guy possibly out there. He is married. His sister's Jenny Slate. She gets a job at the flower shop just because she's bored.
Despite showing up with a Birkin bag.
I appreciate the honesty. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
the times they'll come in and they'll be like, "Oh, I really need this." I like that she just said, "I'm bored. Look,
Yeah.
I'm just like a rich housewife. I got nothing to do." But
I'm
and you know
bored and
what?
your shop looked pretty.
And I've always wanted to see the inside. I like
Yeah.
Jenny Slate in the movie. I thought she was funny. She has
Yeah.
one of the better scenes later. But overall, it's this relationship that builds that honestly becomes kind of a twist. There's an aspect of, I want to say, the last duel in this movie with the way it's
Mm-hmm.
presented to you in the first half to what the second half is. Some people need trigger warnings for this stuff, but I also think that's a big part that you should notice in the marketing, because you're
Yeah.
supposed to see it from her point of view, and to get it explained to you is more of a spoiler than it is a trigger warning. But for those who need it, I guess it's there. I saw a lot of girls come into this thinking it was a girls' night out movie. They had girls' night out
Yeah.
screenings.
They literally had screenings labeled Girls Night Out,
Yes,
which
that were
I
selling
don't
out on
know, from a
Wednesdays.
marketing standpoint, that's a choice.
Hey, that first half they thought it was a rom com,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second half comes in, and let's
It's
talk
not.
about it. What do you think of it?
You know, I had heard a lot of things about the book that definitely clouded my judgments towards the negative coming into this one. So I maybe had some assumptions coming into it that played out in terms of how I ultimately felt about this one.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my bigger issues with it is that I felt it was kind of a little bit like listless and pointless for the first 30-45 minutes. You talk about that sort of turn that it takes from romantic drama, maybe a little rom-com-y, into something different. And in that period before, there's just kind of like no real tension. It's just the story of Blake Lively as this woman living her life, opening her store, meeting a new guy. And
Thank you for saying Blake Lively, because it's Blake Lively on screen, bro.
yeah, and she's not exactly disappearing into the part. She, you know, it just sort of is kind of like nice for a little while, and
Cute.
it's kind of just there, and then it sort of deepens and adds complexity to her backstory, to their relationships, and the structure of it just felt so novelistic to me. It's so much about like her internal journey, and I bet it would be really aided by like having a bit of internal monologue. You said you're reading the book. I think it's supposed to be from her perspective in the first person.
Yeah, let me
So
hit you with
like,
this. So she pretty much tells you everything from her point of view in her head. So when you have the
mhm,
rooftop scene, it's a lot of it's just coming up from here. So they had to
right.
rewrite it in a way so that it's them discussing it. And I had heard, Mr. Deadpool came in, did a little read whites here and there, I guess all throughout it. And they are married, so there are moments where you do see the Lady Deadpool in her, in the way that she's
Hmm.
speaking, in the way that she's talking. But the book structures those flashbacks, Zach, and I need you to take this seriously through her connection that her and her ex flame had for Ellen DeGeneres.
Yeah, I believe, what is it? Half the book is written like a letter to Ellen
A
DeGeneres.
diary for Ellen that wastes time saying, Ellen, I pitch you this idea for you to take your show this way and that
Oh,
way.
jeez.
And then just her recounting like what she did. It could have just been a diary. Hell, Zach, it could have just been a flashback. But they're like, no, no, no,
Hmm.
no, no. That would be too cliche. What if we just forced this Ellen bit? Like, full no, just throw in Ellen. I noticed it in reverse because I saw a Finding Nemo poster. I'm always going to catch a Finding Nemo poster. I saw the
Hmm.
Finding Nemo plushie in there. So there's like a lot in the background that you could say was inspired from the book or was probably cut up, so it's not fully there in the finished product. But there is an Ellen shot in the movie, and she is still writing to Ellen in the movie. But that is a much bigger part in the book because that's what sparks the flashbacks. So it is more internal.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I just felt like it went along at a pace that didn't really engage me, and then when it finally sort of got to the actual meat of the story, I don't know. I'm of a conflicted mind about it,
All right.
honestly, because I think I don't love the way that it sort of presents the relationship and makes excuses for his behavior and kind of treats some of it as like romantic, but I also like can understand that this is also similar to a lot of people's experience, and there's a lot of people who will probably relate to the journey that Blake Lively's character goes on. I don't think I found it to be particularly well told, and I'm going to do something that I hate when we do on this podcast, but recommend a movie that no one can see for probably another year, and that we saw a film at South by
South by.
Southwest called was it I Love You Forever?
I love you forever. Yep.
That covers very similar thematic territory, but I think just explores it with a lot more nuance, a lot more engaging characters, a lot more humor, and I just sort of believed that trajectory a lot more than I did in Ed's with Us.
That's a great pick. I had written that down. Halfway through, we just looked at each other. Aline and I were like, oh, we know the
I
better
Love You Forever,
versions.
yeah.
And I don't even want to say better because the way that you mentioned about the writing, I think, is very important because that's what the book gets a lot of flack for. The
Hmm.
simplicity of writing can be both a good thing and a bad thing. I think it
Right.
allows it to reach a lot of people who just want to consume something a lot simpler. I think of Colleen Hoover and the massive attention that she's got into that. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That poet who got that book was just like 4 lines per. She's made
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I know
shoot.
you know what I'm
I
talking
know who
about.
you're talking about, but yeah, the very simple poems that people like to make fun of. Um,
And people so much backlash for it because it got so much attention, because it
yeah,
hit, because its simplicity connected with people. And I think the same thing is happening here, and where you and I may like the South by pick, and I would highly recommend it because I'm very curious how they're going to market that one because that is also a comedy, right?
I do want to mention that I'm adding I Love You Forever to the weekend must watch letterbox list. We are updating letterbox lists every week here on the show. So if you want to keep track of what we talk about on the podcast or add some of these titles to your watch lists, you can just follow the Intercut Letterboxd account and check those out.
But yeah, I'm very curious how they're going to market that one that you just put on the letterbox list because I think the biggest problem that this one had was marketing it as a what's it called a triangle movie, a love triangle. It
Right.
has you rooting for people when that is not the intent of what the story's supposed to say.
Yeah, it's
Now,
not Team Jacob, Team whatever,
exactly.
right? Team
This
Edward.
is more, and it's interesting to mention her because she's about to have another movie coming up, a sequel to one of her biggest ones that she leads, A Simple Favor.
Hmm.
And for A Simple Favor 2, she's reuniting with Anna Kendrick. She's got a movie that I think is the more dramatic, serious angle take, I guess, if you want to, about it, about this subject called Alice Darling. I would highly recommend this movie
Yeah,
if
that's
the
a great
subject
pick.
matter touches you for this other one. Again, this is more of a drama. We have more of an indie comedy with I Love You
Hmm.
Forever. This is trying to put you in the POV of her, and that's why I mentioned The Last Duel, because I feel you. They play with you a lot in this movie as a viewer because you're supposed to see it from her POV. How
Hmm.
does she become like her mom, who didn't leave the situation she was in with her father? And a lot of it kind of upset me. It frustrates me because I'm like, you're making some of this stuff not as impactful, not as aggressive as it is, because right after you're going to have a lovey-dovey cute scene. And I felt that
Hmm.
was very manipulative. I heard stuff from that from the book, but then I realized that like that is not the worst thing in a narrative where the topic is abuse. And the more that I've thought
And
about it,
manipulation.
yeah, it's not that I'm praising the movie, but I did like it a little bit more. I think the angle that it takes to see her point of view and how she's got these what is it, rose-colored glasses on, and how
Yeah.
she sees things, it's kind of fascinating. It's an interesting look at how something like this can happen, and I really like what Justin said in terms of how he approached the movie, and that was in particular directing it not necessarily for the women who get asked why did they stay, why didn't they leave, but more so what causes the men to become that. And I think the book might peel at it a little bit more. I think there's aspects of it in the movie that they don't get to fully, but it
Hmm.
was partly there. Like they kind of flesh out his character, but the author said it's based off of her mom. Like Blake Lively's playing her mom, which is funny for Blake Lively to then go make it Blake Lively with her outfits and
Right.
everything. But he specifically said like there is moments in there that are supposed to show you like what caused him to become that. How can you stop this cycle to begin with? What can cause him to change? And Colleen talked about her father being an alcoholic, but that's not fully in the movie. And I think those are elements that get chopped up from the truth into the movie because they're trying to sell you a rom com, and you would not be on his side if he was drinking. But that's what caused the initial trauma. So I don't know. It's a little conflicting from that point of view, but the ending worked for me. When they bring the title in, very melodramatic, but I know that it changed some stuff from the ending of the book as well. But overall, I ended up pretty positive with it. I almost went 3.5. I think there's some stuff behind the scenes and a better approach they could have done with it. I'm sticking with a positive 3 though so far.
I'm more negative. I'm probably at a like 2 on it, to be honest. Um,
Okay.
but I can see where people would find value in it. I am curious though how you land on all of the buzz and gossip about what's going on behind the scenes of this movie.
What have you heard?
All right, so the broad strokes of what I heard, and you mentioned, this is Justin Baldoni, who is not only the director of this film, but co-stars in the film. Who, by the way, kind of weird choice to cast yourself in the sort of like abusive boyfriend part, but that's
He
a whole other
messaged the
thing.
author, has a
Hmm.
company, and he said, I want to make this movie. She then pitched, I think it should be you. I think you'll be able to handle it with the most nuance. So she picked him, which is another weird
Interesting.
element to it. Yeah, because then keep going.
Yeah. So at some point, uh, it seems like Blake starts to
Take over.
implement her influence on the film and sort of make it more in the type of movie she wants it to be. You mentioned earlier that apparently that opening balcony scene between the two of them was
Hmm.
substantially rewritten by either her or Ryan Reynolds or both.
Yeah. And that he did several other
And
scenes too.
yeah, and if you there was a Vogue profile on Blake Lively recently, and there was an interesting quote in that article where she talks about the idea of editing and adapting, and she said, "A blank page is not nearly
Yeah.
as exciting to me as starting with a script and finding something people have overlooked. Saying no, there's something there. To me, it's a treasure hunt, and so when I can see the treasure, then I get to be an archaeologist. I get to excavate, I get to carve it out and find this thing and show people the value in it. That to me is what I love." Which, just from the perspective of a writer, I shudder at the thought of somebody being like, "Yes, give me your script so I can change it how I want." But I also
Yeah.
feel like that is how a lot of great decisions do get made in Hollywood. Like, films are all ultimately a collaboration. So
Editors,
I don't
producers, yeah. This is pretty much what she's saying
exactly
is she wants to do that. She wants to tinker. She wants to be the Drake, She wants the
right.
thing already done for her to put her little style to it. And I was surprised. I thought it was gonna get more backlash because it turns out like a
Hmm.
lot of people are against them. They're like the new Blunt and Krasinski. I don't know which one you like more, Krasinski or Reynolds here, but I see a
That's a
lot of
pretty
people
easy
have.
call for me.
Who you got?
Krasinski by a mile.
Really? But you hated If.
Yeah.
Anyway, so them both being there, I think adds a lot of like animosity that people have just to them as a power couple. But I was
Yeah.
surprised that a lot of people took that quote and said, well, that's just what an editor is. That's what this is. But yeah, the writers definitely had an issue with it. I also cringed when I first heard it. I was like, yeah, you, and it's crazy because again, Colleen Hoover made this movie about her mom, or the story is
Right.
about her mom. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's her doing her mannerisms all throughout the
Right.
movie.
But how this is played out further is that as they are releasing the movie, apparently pretty much everyone involved in the cast, Colleen Hoover included, who you
Mhm.
mentioned, picked Justin Baldoni. They've all
Crazy.
unfollowed Justin Baldoni on social media. And for doing press for the movie, they seem to be doing it. The cast and Blake Lively are doing their interviews together, and then Justin Baldoni's doing all his interviews way over there. I believe he was asked about whether or not he'd be interested in directing the sequel, and he said Blake should do it. So I think that implies a bit about what's going on.
Yeah. Um, I think the worst thing that I've heard is this idea that they actually obviously had clashing creative ideas for it,
Mm-hmm.
which way it was going to go, what the focus was going to be on it. And you can go one of two ways. To some people, he was very aggressive, and you could take that in whatever way. He wanted to implement his stuff, and they said, no, this is a female driven story. But they did hire a male director. So, in having that male director, his big push was that he surprisingly talked to a lot of organizations Hoover never did when she wrote the book.
Mm.
Listening enough to him, I do think he cares. It sounds to me like a lot of the pushback was she really wanted to make it her thing. She wanted to sell her clothing design. That's been a lot of the accusations.
Yeah.
It's her boots up on screen. Colleen Hoover even talked about like, oh my gosh, I got to touch her boots on set. It's like, are we telling your mom's story, or are we making this a vehicle for her to crack jokes up there, for her to be more
Mm-hmm.
funny, for her to stylize the things that she wants to? And I heard that Riles Justin, the director, really wanted to push the themes of the movie. That was the important part for him. I heard that a lot of the rollout was in order for them to not be lovey dovey and have fan cam edits and interviews, they shouldn't be together. So I know we've added a lot of like controversy to it, but sometimes a director does do interviews outside of it. And I
Yeah.
think in all of those interviews, he's even mentioned that he's been wearing black because he doesn't want to be too bright considering what his character represents. So I can only imagine him and Blake laughing it up and people shipping them when the purpose of the story is abuse. You know, I if I were to give them the benefit of the doubt, I think it's part of the marketing as well in trying to take care of the story. I don't
Mm.
think there's that much animosity outside of it. I don't think they've insulted themselves publicly yet. I think everything else is
Yeah.
still speculation, but it's definitely a little awkward. I won't lie. But he still
Yeah.
has to come back. The sequel includes him.
Mm.
So we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, I guess it's a story not yet fully told because you mentioned that sequel. I think it's a safe bet that we're going to get one. It did not win the weekend because Deadpool and Wolverine is continuing to steamroll through its third weekend as it I think it's up to about $500 million domestically now.
Yeah.
But just under Deadpool and Wolverine's 54.1 million is It Ends With Us's $50 million opening the weekend. That is a crazy high number, particularly for a film 50.
Yeah, you said
Particularly
last week
for
40 would have been good.
yeah. I 40 would have been crazy, and 50 is even more nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it ends with us. We're used to seeing those kind of numbers for like superhero adaptations, action movies. Dune opens to numbers that are 50 million and up. Marvel opens to 50 million and up. A romantic drama about overcoming abuse is totally new. It's a
New territory for sure.
new territory for this kind of release. I saw a lot of people pointing out that you can draw a connection between this and Where the Crawdads Sing, which is another buzzed about novel adaptation that's sort of like a melodramatic romantic movie that's about like love triangle of sorts. And that movie is another one that did surprisingly well in theaters. And, it speaks to perhaps this like underserved audience of these adult women, people who consume this type of fiction, these popular New York Times seller books, that,
Mhm.
there's a market to make more movies in this style.
And that's another bit too, because I think a big part of the marketing and the clash between the creatives for this movie was: are you pushing the themes of it that are a bit more adult, or are you pushing
Mm-hmm.
the rom com? The can you sell that aspect of it? And this did have a 50 Shades type marketing spiel. It was like that perfect in between of being very serious, but then also the steaminess of it. Again, selling the love triangle of it. So I'm sure there's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a sequel for it. That's great. 50 is not bad, especially with that
Mm-hmm.
Girls Night Out screening that we were talking about, where they were making that much money. So we shall see.
Yeah,
We
a
shall
lot better
see.
than Borderlands' 8.8 million on the
Abysmal.
$100 million budget.
Ridiculous, bro. And that's
Yeah.
all from the popcorn buckets, too. That's what's great.